directly with the family, primarily training them for advocacy opportunities and preparing them to tell their stories effectively to elicit change among lawmakers and legislators. We recognize that there's significant crossover with both prevention and recovery, and that so many of you are looking for answers and resources and support and even treatment options. So, since we really pride ourselves on addressing your needs, we thought it would be very beneficial to focus this month's webinar on recovery by not only providing you with vital information and resources, but most importantly, with hope, because that's something you all need to have. The stories you hear tonight will affirm that recovery is possible. And while the road might be challenging, and especially where marijuana is concerned, because there's so many other challenges in today's landscape with the normalization and commercialization of this product, um, while it's challenging, there's still hope. And there's hope that your lives can be fulfilling when you accept your new reality and find the strength and a purpose in your life. So, with that, I want to thank Dr. Munch and both the Wolfs and the Stevensons for being here to share their stories, because this is never an easy thing to do. And we appreciate you so much for being here. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Munch. And I just want to say before we start, please keep your speakers on mute. We want to give all the speakers the respect, and especially our young men as they tell their stories. And this might be a little longer because we want to let them tell their stories at their own pace. So just be patient with us and hold all questions, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. So again, I'd like to introduce Dr. Fred Munch. Having overcome his own struggles with addiction, he went on to become a clinical psychologist. He is the former president and CEO of the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids and the former president of the Partnership to End Addiction. And he is currently the founder and CEO of Clear 30, a company created to help individuals explore their relationship with cannabis by taking a 30-day break. He celebrates each day in recovery, stating that, and I love this quote, that there is beauty in hard work and persistence for a reward that surpasses any individual quick fix. So with that, I turn it over to you, Fred. Thank you so much for being here. Can't wait to hear your part. Thank
Thank,
you.
thank you, Chrissy. Thank you, Bronwyn. Thank you so much to all the families here. I, as someone who is seeing the consequences of substance use disorders and recreational use now, particularly with cannabis, it's just such a blessing to have this group specifically dedicated to cannabis use and cannabis use disorders, because it's the stepchild when we're looking at treatment and when we're trying to focus on substance use disorders and change. It's cannabis use is perceived by the treatment community as the stepchild, even though we know that for individuals under 21, cannabis use disorder is the number one reason young people go to treatment. We know that cannabis use disorder dwarfs all other substances when it comes to daily use amongst young people, and now it's just surpassed alcohol use amongst all people. And I think and I'll talk a little bit about the cultural zeitgeist of what's happening and why I think we should give these young people who are making a change so much credit, and that more importantly that they're spreading the word is so important. So I'm going to give a bit of an overview. I think I went a little more researchy than I should have, but I'm going to go fairly quick because for me, the most important thing is to provide some information for you. You can take, ask for the slides, and then we want to hear from the young people because that's what matters. People's experiences in recovery, people's experiences while they were using people's experiences while they were in the midst of a psychotic or episode or psychosis. That's what we're here for. So I'm going to go fairly quickly through this. interrupt, stop me. I'll be available for questions after. At 8 o'clock, I'm going to turn my camera off just as a side note, but I will be here for questions. And now I'm going to share my screen and go through. I have a presentation. Can everybody see? Great. Okay. Mention started Clear 30. So I left the partnership. And one of the things we found was 40% of the parents calling our family helpline, it was for cannabis. And I was in charge of building a digital support for family members, both in terms of group-based support, but also our automated support. And what it came down to is there was nowhere to send them. We were sending them to certain mutual support groups, which are amazing, which I'll talk about. Reddit groups are amazing. People are not talking about this in the treatment field, but they're amazing. But there was not a lot out there aside from a couple of basic apps, and then there was formal treatment. The other thing we learned is that clinicians are not trained in treating cannabis use disorder and working with people because it's so different than other substances, right? There, and we were chatting before this started, which is there is a struggle, a dissonance amongst young people in particular, that this is not harmful. And because it's subtle, it's insidious, and it's hard to see, because the immediate rewards are very powerful, and it's very hard to attach those immediate rewards with the consequences. You know, with alcohol, you have a hangover right away. You get in a car accident. With opioids, you know, you have a potential overdose. You're seeing the addiction rear its head. With cannabis, it's different until it's not. And then it hits you, right? And then it hits. So just going to go through some of the data and research, and particularly in terms of some of the research, and then I'll talk about some of the Clear 30 data of the nearly 4,000 people who've used the app and since our launch on 4/21 of this year. This is just who I am. I have a number of different affiliations. I'm an associate professor at Feinstein Institutes of Medical Research and the Zucker School of Medicine, as well as Clear 30. We know this. I think the big highlight here is that for the first time in history, and you know, just in general, people let me know if I'm repeating stuff that everyone knows. Okay, but I do want to highlight this. For the first time in history, there's more daily cannabis users than drinkers. And why this is important, there's 3 times as many drinkers as cannabis users. So what that means, that 8.3% of drinkers drink daily versus 28.9% of cannabis users. So there's something specifically about cannabis that is very powerful, and that 28.9% is a large number. And even if some of the stats in drinking are a little higher, I'm just using the latest NISDA data, but either way, it's shocking what we're seeing. And we all know this, and everyone's been chatting with, the average potency is 10 to 15 times higher than it was 50 years ago. So 1 joint today is 12 joints in 1970. And as we'll see, that is a big problem. In terms of availability, so we all know about availability, it's everywhere. But more important also is the shifting cultural norms, right? Marijuana is perceived, cannabis is perceived as, THC is perceived as safe. And look at that dramatic rise in perceived safety. No other substances. And it's a result of commercial ad campaigns and commercialization of cannabis use. Now, there were issues with the war on drugs. There were issues with criminalization. Nobody's denying that. Separate that from commercial campaigns. And we see this in young people. And I think it's shifting a little bit in terms of, you know, people getting frustrated with the ads, but we'll chat about that in a little bit. Oh, there you go. Sorry about that. You know, just a show, I can't see everybody, but just a show of hand, do people know this research? Should I just skip past this and focus on other things? What do people think? And any thoughts?
I
I
would
don't,
say, Fred, that you can give this quick overview. A
okay,
lot of us are visual thinkers, and so seeing some of these graphs still helps.
okay,
And there are always at least 1 or 2 new people on these webinars that we don't
okay,
recognize the names. So I would not, you know, maybe talk fast through them, but
yep,
I think they're still important.
okay, great. Well, there is an association between both high potency cannabis use and regular cannabis use, and psychosis and psychotic symptoms, both in terms of paranoia from cannabis use and psychosis and schizophrenia. Daily use 3 times higher rate, high potency 2 times higher rates. When you merge them, 5 times higher. So there's this strong association, and this has been replicated over and over and over again. This is not like new research, even though new research, and these are massive sample sizes, like 36,000 people in Denmark, or the Netherlands. It's not minimal. All right, I'll just look at some of the, okay, I just want to make sure. Okay, yes, I will share the deck, of course. Okay. Okay, so, and this is another interesting thing. When you look at this was a Nature article that it just came out in 2024. I highly recommend people take a look at it. 20% of cannabis users in open studies and experimental THC report psychotic symptoms. And then in medical cannabis studies, where it's tightly controlled and is much lower doses, and they're taking people off when they're starting to experience psychotic symptoms, it's lower. So, and I think this is what people cite when they're advertising, or they're citing something highly controlled, but we know it's not highly controlled. In the real world, people are going to the dispensary and buying a joint or a dab or a cart that's 50% THC or whatever it might be. So there is differential effects beyond frequency and potency. So there is administration. A single dose will create something acutely, but over the long term, you need to use it more times. Younger, more at risk for psychosis. This is from the article. I'm just bipolar disorder, psychosis liability, mood disorders, depression, addiction, more proneness to addiction, dopamine activity. They've done fMRI studies showing that it increases risk of psychosis. Oddly, in the Nature study, it was female gender, but other studies suggested the exact opposite, that it's male gender in terms of schizophrenia. So I thought that was fascinating. It's a new study, so I'm always interested in that. They're not using all of the real world studies as well as the large scale epidemiological studies that have shown it's male. One of the things I don't think we talk about enough, and this is something I would like to spend a little bit of time on, is the relationship between cannabis, THC in particular, and executive functioning. And this is where we get into decision making. And this is a great study that looked at a number of different variables of executive functioning, and looking at acute effects, which means administration, right after administration, residual effects, which is usually next day, and then long-term effects. And these studies they just take up with a grain of salt, because most of them are older and most of them are with low dose THC, right? So I just be mindful that there's a huge caveat here in terms of especially some of the long-term findings. But what you really see is this impaired effects right away. But then in terms of decision-making and risk-taking, there's a lot of impairment. And decision-making in particular, there's a lot of issues. And the inhibition impulsivity, the mixed findings, you're definitely seeing that people are more impulsive in the newer data since this study was done. And a little deeper on long-term decision-making. So specifically, cannabis alters decision-making and risk assessment abilities, reduced activity in brain regions associated with decision-making. And this is over the short-term and long-term. And particularly with paranoia, psychosis, inability to accept help, that what people were chatting about before was this lack of insight into the effects of cannabis. So, but there's a decreased sensitivity to negative feedback. So when someone's giving you feedback on yourself, you have decreased sensitivity to it, which may explain some of the resistance, which is fascinating. And then increased harm and threat perception, that people are out to get you, the paranoia, and they see this in MRI studies. So there's mechanisms here in terms of the decision-making process that are unique to the endocannabinoid system, particularly the CB1 receptors, in terms of what's happening in the brain. And so why might THC increase paranoia and psychosis? I think we talk about it, we say it, but there's not enough, I think, out there to say, okay, what are some of the mechanisms why this might be happening? And both in the short term and the long term. So this dysregulation of dopamine, we know in schizophrenia and psychosis, there's excessive dopamine. We see this in cannabis use in terms of activating the CB1 receptors, impact on threat perception. So it modulates processing as perceived threat. So it's a misinterpretation of ambiguous stimuli as threatening. It's so important, right? So if you see this, people see this in depression. So what you see is a neutral face. Someone who's depressed interprets that face as depressed. Someone who's happy interprets that face as happy, right? So how we perceive information and process information, THC makes us process it through perceived threat, creating ambiguous stimuli, making us more paranoid. There's also altered memory and cognition. So and we know this, both in the short term and the long term, it impacts the hippocampus in the short term, reality testing, and making it difficult between real and imagined threats. And as we know, there's also sensory distortions. We know this from acute cannabis use, higher sensory experiences, louder sounds, brighter colors, all this contributing to feeling a threat. So if something is more intense, it's going to be more overwhelming for people. Yet it's not processed as that. Okay. So why is it hard to have this discussion? Why is it hard when we think? And so I do want to apologize. I don't focus enough on recovery here, and the young people I hope will do that more. I do give some resources to focus on recovery, and particularly some things that I think we're not doing that specifically help with psychosis and cannabis use recovery. But so why is it hard? The short-term benefits drive decisions in all of our lives. We see this across the board, and particularly cannabis has few short-term benefits. The people who get paranoid right away when they use THC often do not use it later. But when it's subtle, it's hard to tell because there's short-term benefits. The short-term acute effects of THC administration is reduced depression, right? It actually works in the short term for most people. And then when I have discussions with other people, I'm like, well, as someone in recovery primarily from heroin addiction, which was what really took me down and what I consider myself in recovery for, it was great. Nothing was better in the short term than heroin. Nothing is better than alcohol. Like, of course it is. But you see those consequences. It's easy to see the consequences, right? Like you can see it like, oh, this is directly causing the consequences. This subtle onset, you don't see the link between paranoia and cannabis. It's transient also. And that's fascinating, right? Which is like paranoid thoughts fluctuate. So it's hard to recognize as persistent. So one day you might not have them, the next day you do. So it's hard to connect. There's a reinforcing cycle. Increased anxiety leads to more cannabis use and youth. The thing about youth is right. We have less residual physical consequences, mental consequences. Like it's just easier to ignore. You can wake up after a hard night of partying and go to school. That it's not as easy to do that later, even if you're feeling off. Clear 30 was born out of this. And for those who are recommending, just a little background on tea breaks, and specifically we did do some research on breaks and recalibrating the endocannabinoid system. But we started Clear 30 as an abstinence and moderation program. And then what we found was everybody is willing to take a break. And our goal was engagement. Our goal was to say to people, if you are resistant to getting help or resistant to making a change, we do know that everyone will take a tea break, a tolerance break. And if it's done the right way, it can improve outcomes. If it's done the wrong way, it can actually make use worse. So short breaks of 3 to 7 days and even 3 to 14 days are associated with increased use 6 months later. Longer than 14 days are associated with reduced use. But what you can do, especially after 30 days, is because cannabis withdrawal is so long and it takes so long for cannabis to get out of the system, we focus on 30 days. And down regulation over time, right? So it's tolerance. And what we're trying to do is reduce tolerance. So it's less THC, create some mood stability, and trying to reset dopamine levels. So what does our data say? So we've had about 5,000 people come into our research, and hopefully this will give you some insight into individuals who are trying to take a break, and some insight into how to help people recover based on some of their data. Right now, we're building the largest data set of young people in terms of interested in taking a break. And we are sharing this. We're working with the Recovery Research Institute at Harvard. We're giving them all of our data, both our immediate baseline data as well as our long-term data. And they're going to not only look at our assessment and surveys and our outcome data, but also how people use the app, how different people use the app. What are people with higher levels of potentially mental health concerns? How do they use it versus others? So we're really excited to explore this data. But the bottom line here is our users are young. They are very young. And initially, we didn't target young people until it was only young people. And then we just moved to TikTok, right? We were doing Facebook, we were doing Instagram, TikTok. It was TikTok. It was all young people. It was so we had 21 to 25-year-olds, and people were saying they were, when then we opened it up to 18 to 20, it exploded. We're really grateful. We think we have the 13 to 17-year-old Small Business Innovation Research Grant from NIDA that we think we just got. And we're building an intervention for 13 to 17-year-olds too, because we know that's when it's getting started. 85% are using daily. Right? So this is not casual use. As one of our board members said, these individuals have cannabis use disorder, but they're not calling it cannabis use disorder, right? So young people are not seeing it. They don't want to go to treatment. Previous break attempts, most people have tried something, and a large percentage have actually maintained a break. Now, we didn't define it, but just that people are trying to stop. And what this means is that there's a group of people who are trying to stop, they're recognizing it. So what's the trigger? Overwhelmingly, it's this enhancement. I like being high. It reduces boredom, and then relieves stress and relax. And then others, friends, to fall asleep, other things, escape negative emotions. But we see this with young people in general. There's enhancement motives versus stress and coping motives. And then they realize it's stress and coping motives. So remember, this is self-report, but they're not calling it that in the beginning. Right. So we're trying to understand and get an idea of why people are using. This is fascinating. And this gets to people's relationship with cannabis. And as we think about recovery, what that means, these are individuals who want to take a break. And just as a side note, this is different than alcohol. Overwhelmingly, right, people find it's helping more than harming their cannabis use, yet they're still willing to take a break. If we ask these people to stop or moderate without a break, they're not going to do it necessarily, right? So if you 80% of people say it's at least equal, but or helping more than harming. And these are people who are making a change. So then we see just people who are not looking to take a tea break. It's going to be dramatically different. This is so radically different than other substances that we are dealing with a completely different beast here, as the young people will tell you after. And so then we just added this, like, so wait, why are you taking a break? And the percentages are off because the denominator was off, but you can use it as a relative gauge. It's much higher. Like mental clarity is probably closer to about 80%, but it's really to gain that mental people. And that's why we called it Clear 30. We did a lot of research before we even started our company. But this clarity, dependency, and self-control, people are feeling out of control. They're feeling in a fog, going through life, just in this fog. And even though they're saying they like being high, there's a dissociation in the world, And young people want to get some clarity. They want to get some clarity. So after a break, they want to use yes or less or differently overwhelmingly. we're allowing them to do that. Even for people, we're adding in more severity measures, and we're going to make recommendations based on our baseline data of what we think people should do. But right now, we're just trying to understand, and we're trying to help for those who want to use less. We're going to help them create a mindful use program, lower potency, harm reduction. About 23% want to use less, and a number don't know. And very few want to use the same, which tells us a lot. Our outcome data is good. I'll go just briefly overall. If people are committed, they're using about 4 days out of the 30. And if they're somewhat committed, it's about 9 days, 10 days, with an average of about 7 days. We have more data. I didn't update the slide. It's very similar data. We're finding more people completing the 30 days with our new app features. So what this means is people who find that weed is helping them, find that they're getting benefit from it and like being high, will take a break. And this is our goal, right? Not everyone, but our goal is to create some dissonance and help people live with more intention so they can at least get some clarity. And we've received some pushback from the recovery field of like, hey man, you got to focus more on abstinence in your app. And we do for 30 days, and then we let people go. But we're focused on the long game with people, given how people are processing this information. So there's resources here. Everyone will have access to this. Everyone here will also have free codes to Clear 30. There's a QR code at the end that you can use, and it's a free code. It's only iOS right now. We're doing Android, building it in January. There's a number of great resources here that I highly recommend everybody use. I'm a huge fan of Reddit. I never was. I can tell you Reddit Leaves is one of the best online groups I've ever seen. The people are amazing. They are amazing. They're there to support others. There's very few trolls, and when the trolls come on, they're taken off right away. I highly recommending Reddit Leaves, which so the PDLs is moderation, leaves is abstinence. And so I highly recommend it. Weedless is a great. Marijuana Anonymous for people who really want abstinence. Highly recommend. In terms of recovery, 72% of individuals with a history of cannabis dependence do recover. We're in remission in the last year in one of these larger studies. So it's possible, and most people do recovery. Having co-occurring mental health issues makes it harder because that's in general. That's just the SUD literature, right? Women more likely to recover. Going back to that first 72%, that's high. And in the long term, that's closer to 90% of recovery. So recovery is really possible. The problem is when you're younger, it's harder, right? So it takes longer to get into recovery. The good thing is compared to something like opioids, people are usually, right now we all know the relationship between cannabis and depression and suicide. And if you don't, please dive into these articles. It is the most underreported consequence of cannabis use. People are reporting on psychosis. People are not reporting on cannabis use and depression and psychosis. And it's not just that young people who are depressed are more likely to use cannabis. It's that cannabis causes or increases the risk for later depression and suicide. And I think the suicide and depression is because of the impact on decision making. I think it's the cognitive impact that it's then creating depression because people are struggling with their decisions. And I think it's, so I highly recommend it. Social support is huge. It's everything. Families matter, right? Families are everything. And then specifically with cannabis and psychosis, there are very few treatments available. And frankly, even according to the literature, the interventions are insufficient at this point, and we have to do more. And I'm sure young people will talk about this. I'm going to go quick here, but it's really about integrated, coordinated specialty care, right? Really getting people involved and in comprehensive care that involves a lot, and it's very different than simply cannabis. It's much more related to treatment for schizophrenia or psychosis, which the good thing is over time can become more like traditional cannabis recovery. Contingency management shows efficacy, psychoeducation, families. Everyone knows my bias, but I'm biased to families. But families and mutual support are so important in this. And obviously medication management, it's hard in the beginning, but getting young people stabilized with medication is very, very important. I want to highlight something about mindfulness-based interventions. And I'm biased here. Um, as you can see, I've written a fair amount on um, improving psychiatric, substance use disorders, and stress-related medical conditions with mindfulness-based practices. It's very close to my heart, particularly therapeutic breathing in terms of regulating the autonomic nervous system, which we know is a predictor of both relapse and psychosis in terms of autonomic dysregulation. And there is a literature for psychosis where mindfulness-based interventions are adapted for psychosis, and it's shown to reduce psychotic symptoms, decrease depression, and lower rehospitalization rates. It also reduces severity of relapse and risk of relapse. It's so powerful. Breathing is so powerful for depression. I recommend everybody do it. Particularly, we built a free app. It's called Breath Pacer, and it's all about autonomic balance. You can use it. There's no ads in it, no cost. It's just a free app that anybody can use. Highly recommend using any of the 200 free apps on the web too, like whatever's there. For recovery, this is my personal bias. Recovery Dharma is it's Buddhist inspired, but unlike 12-step, which I love too, I do not go to 12-step anymore. I did in the beginning, but that was not my recovery journey. It's focused on any craving. It's of any sort. It's very focused on our desire to escape ourselves and then the disconnect between ourselves and reality. And I highly recommend this because I've found over and over that people find it approachable, particularly people with paranoia, is that there's not this I'm becoming part of a cult thing, and which is not true with 12-step, but I do find that people find it very engaging. So just a note, I'm not going to talk about this. Here's your QR code. I'll send it out. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. And I'm here to answer any questions. It seems like there's a bunch in the chat.
So Fred, we're gonna take all those questions at the end. You'll be
Great.
here with us till the end, right? And so
Yep. I will
we've
be
asked,
here. Yep.
yeah, so we've asked the audience to hold questions, and if we don't get to them, we will provide them with answers. But yeah, Bronwyn keeps track of the questions, so we will address them all, as many as we can within the time. So everybody, take a moment to download this app if you want. But again, if you
Ooh.
miss it, don't worry, because you will be provided with everything you need. And thank you so much, Fred. That was really amazing. And as you can see from the chat, very vital information. We have a lot of people here involved with the Schizophrenia and Psychosis Action Alliance and other things like that. So this is all very, very valuable for everybody here tonight. So thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
So now we're going to introduce our first family here today, Linda and Colby Wolf. And I had first heard about Colby's story pretty much when I began working here back in January of 2023. And while I knew the story, I was completely blown away upon seeing them on the Dr. Phil show with the Bacchuses and Aubrey Adams. And you're all just not going to believe this incredible story. And since seeing them on Dr. Phil, I've had many conversations with Linda, and I am truly in awe of her resolve, and of course, in awe of Kobe's strength in telling this story. over and over again, as he's done. Their message is that there is light at the end of this dark tunnel, which we heard from Fred as well, and that recovery from this horrific thing is possible and can create a better life. So with that, I introduce you to Kobe and Linda Wolf.
Hi.
Hi, my name's Kobe. This is my mom, Linda. Yeah, I'd like to thank Fred there. He's smart. He's a smart guy. Yeah. I really respect people who do like the statistics and all the, hard factual information based stuff in this kind of environment, because I know it's really, really difficult, first off, to get the statistics, that are really misrepresented, I think, in a lot of cases. But in most of your stuff, I think it was pretty well represented. I think that had a lot of truth to it. And obviously the numbers are pretty astounding. You know, and like you said, it's a different type of beast. Cannabis is very different, I was never a big drinker, I didn't get involved in any of the really hard drugs early on. It was only after when I started smoking that I began doing other stuff. So when they say like, you know, it's this gateway drug and then you refuse it as a kid, as a younger guy, you're like, oh no, it's not a gateway. Like I could just smoke and like just do that and I'll be fine, it's not really like that. It definitely is a gateway, not only to other drugs, but into a different mindset. One that's a lot more paranoid, it has a lot of, like you mentioned, the decision making, it gets really messed up and the fog that's involved. Speaking from my personal stories, I mean, I had like 4 or 5 years solid where I was beginning my psychosis in the first like 1 to 2 years, maybe it took me to really start getting into it. And then after that, it was just a really slippery slope down into becoming like fully blown psychotic. And I mean, if you've seen the Dr. Phil, you see the episode, you've seen the video, that's just a very small portion of like what I was doing. That was nothing in comparison to a lot of the other stuff I was doing. So, that right there, it shows a lot of like it's this kind of thing that where it changes your mind. And if your mind's still developing and you don't really have all those connections established, it's pruning, your brain's pruning until the age of 25. And if you mess up that pruning process, you could be screwed up for a lot longer than how I did. Like I'm really lucky that I didn't get like permanently disabled, literally disabled. My mental capacity is nothing right now compared to when I was like 14 before I started smoking, but it's better than like a year or two ago where it was just pure, fog. It was this, and I had so many other things to blame for it. But in reality, like after being off of weed for almost a year now, it's been really easy to like kind of talk about it, and realize that it really, really fricks me up, and I think it fricks up a lot of more people than we want to give it a association to, just in a sense where if you're unaware of it, then you'll just keep doing it because it makes you feel good. So, and if it doesn't make you feel good, at least become aware of it so you can change something. I think the Clear 30 thing is pretty astounding. It's a good step in the right direction. I'd like to speak on the abstinence part. For some people, I think abstinence is the only answer, myself included. But I think for a lot more people, the tea breaks and stuff like that will help come to a realization where it's not, helping. It's really just harming them constantly, especially with like the decision making. I think that's a really good aspect to touch on. I wasn't making good decisions when I was smoking, and in doing so, those actions led to consequences that I had no association with weed to. So I wouldn't associate my bad decision making to weed. I'd associate it with, being unlucky or other people causing it. It wasn't my fault. It was everybody else's but mine. And I'll just keep smoking weed until it gets better because it's only helping, right? And in the reality of it, you're not going to meet the criteria of making a good decision if you're constantly breaking your brain down with, you know, drugs, alcohol, whatever it is. I think a really funny thing that he mentioned was this Buddha program that he used for his recovery. I find that hilarious because in the third psychosis, when I made my trip to the psych ward, somebody in the psych ward gave me the teachings of the Buddha, and I read the entire book in one night, which is a big book, and I read it all. And you know, I may not have like directly applied it right after, but you know, it really helped. Like just even understanding the middle path, like kind of just this kind of direction of keeping your mental like state clear so that you can face the challenging parts of life when you really get up close and personal with it. I like to relate a lot of my stuff to what I do at work and what I'm trying to pursue. As you know, I'm a CNA right now. I work at a nursing home, and so it's a very difficult, you know, laborious, and I'd say very mentally taxing job.
I go to school.
Yeah, well, I'm going to school too to become a psych nurse, hopefully. But until then, I'm just wiping old people butt, and I help like clean up the bad parts of it and all that. So you know, and that's been like a great help. You know, like I can't even imagine like where I'd be right now had I not got this job, which is, you know, only challenging my mental even more. But now I'm able to deal with it and learn from it and enjoy it. Whereas like in the past, man, if I had this job and I was smoking, I'd be like constantly miserable. I'd be like, I'm gonna quit the job, you know. And I see it, you know. There's a lot of people who smoke weed a lot, and the ones I work with, they don't want to be there. Like they are constantly wanting to leave and constantly complaining. And so like that's the type of person I was, like very similar before my psychosis. I'd just be, you know, really negative. I never really saw the positive side of the stuff. I saw the cup half empty, whereas most people around me who weren't smoking, you know, they saw it more of the positives. I think that's a big impact on like your mental health and not being able to comprehend the good side of life anymore because you're so deep in this kind of depression. And I think it's important to know also that weed is an active depressant. It's not like it doesn't affect your depression in a good way. It might be like really temporary, like, you know, it's the great example is when you stop smoking, even if you used earlier the day, you only want to go smoke again. You know, that's like your one thing. You're like, I got to get my hands on that. And that's with like all the drugs, you know. And so, but weed is like this different entity where, you know, you could be off of it for 2 or 3 days just because, you know, you don't have access to it, but then you're craving it. And that crave is like, for weed, for me, it was like more intense than anything I think I could have had. Like, I really like isolated. I got super tunnel vision on getting my hands on more because I think I thought, you know, these withdrawals are not a game. These are like serious. These withdrawals are, I'd argue, up there with like benzodiazepines and alcohol in terms of maybe not, it won't like inherently kill you by the chemical reactions that's happening, but the mental stuff going on. If you're withdrawing from weed and you're not having an active support group, you're not active in recovery, you could very well and easy just go kill yourself. It's so easy, you know, like you just think that. And it's like, there's a lot of kids out there that have this type of thinking. And like I had, you know, every time I think about it, it's like, it could have been me, right? All that shit. But, you know, seeing the other faces, I really see hope, and that's great. But like, man, Heather and Randy, you know, those guys are really cool. You know, I think there's a lot of people who try to fight this thing, and it's really hard, but we'll get there, you know, stay strong. It's just like,
Yeah.
I'm emotional about it because it's like,
Yeah.
I know I wouldn't be here if I didn't have my mom. You know,
Your
people
dad.
like you guys, like Aubrey, who was really early on, and like all that. But like, I just want to shout out, like, you guys, you know, really cool to see people doing this type of work. And, you know, I pray for the people that are like going through it right now, because a lot of them, they'll probably not make it. And that's hard to admit. And it's really hard to get over that because I did. And I just need to stick with it, because if I don't, I could just go right back, you know, next time I smoke, it could be literally that time, you know, for me, you know. And it's like, I can only speak on what I got going on, but I'm doing good now.
Yeah.
I hope to just do better. And this is a really happy thing, you know, it's tears of joy, I think, rather than tears of despair at this point, because, you know, I'd be crying about this in the past, with just like not being able to smoke weed, but now it's like so much more than just not being able to smoke. It's like, what will I lose now if I keep, you know, going back? So, not gonna go back, way over that. But, you know, my secret is like being abstinent, not going back, and having the mental discipline to do that is so freaking hard. And for me, it was ridiculously hard, but I had really good support group to help me get through it. So I think the support group, the family unit, you know, even if without it, you have to find other ways to get that support. So it's super vital though, you know, having people that are there for you in your times of need. Because if you're alone and you're going through this, the chances of you coming out of it are pretty much like slim to none. Like, you know, you don't have people fighting for you and what's good for you. And you just have these like internet influencers, or, you know, people in your life that are influenced by them. There's so many like big wig, you know, people out there, there's social media icons that, and I don't really give examples because we know who it is, you know, there's a lot of them, and they constantly are proponents of weed and the industry, and they're selling their own edibles, and so they're making money off of it, and they're at the same time capitalizing on the mental breakage of the youth, which is super messed up. um and the youth, you know, that's the big part here. It's not old people. You saw the statistic, 89 what percent of the users were 17 to, or 16 to 18, you know, like that's a lot of people, and they're all young, and it's so easy, you know, to go in the bathroom, and if your buddy has a dad pen that he got from his dad or his older cousin who smokes, what's the hard part about going into the bathroom and inviting a friend? You're like, hey, you want to hit this dab pen I got? And it's so easy. It's just a little thing. You can just click a button. And then, like Aubrey says, it's a chemical assault to your brain. Okay. And when your mind's developing, you can't do that. You cannot do that. It is going to freak you up, man. And it did with me, you know. And I think there's a lot of people that have that, you know, they associate weed being good, great, and nothing but positive. But it's only a matter of time they hit that kind of mental wall. And I think it applies to everyone at this point, you know. um, some take like a lot longer than others, but, and it also depends on their addiction level, like how much they do. But, you know, I think for everyone, it's not going to help you. And if you think that, I think you're sorely mistaken, in a way that in the temporary it can help, you know, for certain, very certain individuals, very certain groups. But in the long term, um, it's got its consequences. And for me, it took a long time to figure that one out. And my consequences were, you know, jail, psych wards, and facing a lot of close calls with death, but not that. So, yeah, that's all I got.
So, Chrissy, did you want me to talk about what?
Yes, so first of all, Kobe, thank you so much. And just so you know, because you probably don't have your chat on while you were talking, but Randy and Heather and Aubrey are all here for you at this session. So everybody is here and everybody supports you. So know that. And again, thank you everyone for being here. I do want to say that I do believe we will run a little longer. Again, I think this is such an important topic, and so very, very important that we have these two young men here with us and their moms. And if everyone is okay with it, you know, I want to give the respect of these gentlemen to tell their stories. And yes, we do want to hear from the moms as well, because Kobe did allude to the fact that he would not have been able to do this without you, Linda, and your family. And Fred as well mentioned how very important family is. And we know that recovery is that addiction is a family disease. And so recovery is a family process. So yes, please tell us a little bit
Well, I'll just
about.
I'll just do a quick overview of a long 2 years. It was a terrible, horrific 2 years. But yeah, he had 3 episodes of the cannabis-induced psychosis, and we at that time knew nothing about what weed could do, and we didn't even know he was really smoking weed. We knew he'd done it, but we told him not to. We said it was not okay. And then we saw his whole demeanor change. He was defiant. He was awful. He would argue over everything, and we'd fight and fight and fight. Sent him out of the house one night and said, go stay with his friend. And he didn't go stay with his friend. He went to a homeless shelter and started smoking weed with them. My husband was coming home from work. He saw him standing on the side of the street, and he couldn't believe that he was standing there looking like he was crazy. So I immediately drove down there, and that's when I took that video of Kobe. I couldn't believe it. He was out of his mind. So, that was the first one. We got him in the hospital. Thank God we got a really good psychiatrist that told me it was cannabis-induced psychosis. I couldn't believe it. But thank God he told me that. So thinking he'd never smoke weed again, he had another psychotic episode. And this time I told him he couldn't stay in the duplex that we were renting him and my other son. And he said, fine. And he took off. He lost his car the first episode. He gave it away, or it got stolen from that night that he spent at the homeless shelter. So the second one, he had a new car, or a car again. This was like 8 months later. And he took off and left and got connected up with a really bad person who was out of prison, who was a thief, who was a 49-year-old guy. Just convinced Kobe to drive down to California. He gets in a psychosis. He's in a psychosis the whole way. I'm talking to the police the whole time in California trying to find him, and we didn't know where he was really. It was just on Snapchat, just kind of trying to track him. And finally, he did go into another psychosis. This was a two-week period in California, driving to California. And that man eventually did steal his car and everything in it again. He lost everything. So we go down to California, get him out of the psychiatric hospital there, his second stay in a psychiatric hospital from this. And then thinking, he would never do this ever again. And he did it again, 8 months later again. And, both times in the hospital on medication, that's what he had to have. And calling the police, trying to get him involuntarily committed was a whole other hell that you go through. And then so the third time was when we knew we needed to get help and do it as a family, draw our boundaries. And this whole time I'm talking to Aubrey, and we get a life coach for Kobe, and my husband and I, and we're all doing counseling together for like 6 months. And that was what we needed to do. And that's what finally worked. But yeah, the family counseling is what has to happen. I think that really did it. And when we got smart enough to figure out this was really a super strong addiction for him, we realized that we had to look at it as a addictive, a drug that he was addicted to. And that was what everybody was telling us that wasn't happening, that it wasn't that addictive and that it wasn't really that dangerous. And those people believe that, but it is addicting, and families suffer when they're in these psychosis episodes, and they do need hospitals. They do need medication when they're in it. And it's a process of learning how to get them involuntarily committed. So that was 2 years of hell. But yeah, he's been great now. I think, knock on wood, he's been great.
Yeah,
Thank
it's been a process. I'll just add a little bit more to that. The parts that she missed were my stint in Portland, where I began doing meth. And the only reason I add that is because I wouldn't have done that had I not smoked weed. Okay. Like, that's the decision-making part you kind of lose those boundaries. You lose that thing inside your head that says meth not even once, that I've heard a million times as a kid, but for some reason while smoking weed and in psychosis, I thought it was the easiest decision to make. I was like, yeah, why not? I got a 3rd-degree burn victim whose face looked like a ghoul. It was terrifying, but I wasn't afraid of him. My psychosis was like adverse to like everything that you'd think weed causes. It was the adverse. I was not paranoid. I was highly overconfident. I would never really be scared into a situation. I was just completely ignorant to it, completely unaware of it, and then spurred in my thinking in a way that like I was on this different thought train that anybody could ever be on, ever, right? Like there's stuff that I was thinking that I think about now, and I was like, whoa, like how did that come up? Like how did that ever enter my brain and me believe it? Well, the only answer is because I was smoking, and that led to more stuff, and that led to more stuff, and so I ended up going to California, like she said, and then I stole a BMW, ended up in jail, which was terrifying. I was in Yolo County, and then I had to come down for meth, and that was absolutely horrible. I'd say it was harder than going off of weed, but at the same time, I never did it after that ever. That was the one time, and I had to do it in jail. And I saw the devil in my reflection with horns. I was fully hallucinating. I passed out. I thought they sucked all the oxygen out of my jail cell. I passed out and I woke up and they let me out because there was like COVID restrictions. So they could only hold me for 24 hours after stealing a BMW. And so they let me out and I went on another rampage with the guy. He picked me up. And then a week after that, I ended up in the psych ward, which is great. Jail, you do not bring a person suffering mentally to jail. You bring a criminal to jail. And if they are mentally suffering and also a criminal, you bring them to jail and then you put them in the psych ward. Okay. Like it's one or the other. And I hate it when people are put in jail when they're not, doing absolutely the stuff that requires jail. But it would be a lot better if we had more psych wards than jails, but we don't. So in terms of this stuff, jail doesn't help at all for when a person's mentally suffering. That just makes it worse. I'll say that too.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Kobe. And I'll have you know that there's a lot of parents on tonight's webinar that would highly agree with you. They have children suffering from psychosis from marijuana. There's a mom who her son is in jail currently in full denial of his psychosis and no end in sight. So there are a lot of things going on, and that is why this particular webinar was so very important. But in the interest of time, we're going to move on, and I'd like to introduce Winnie and Toby Stevenson. And Winnie as well, I met early on in my time at Pan, probably around March of 2023, and then we got to know each other better when we both attended Johnny's Ambassador Conference in July of 2023. And since then, Winnie has continued to be a strong advocate for PAN and other organizations fighting this fight. And after years of struggling with addiction, Toby has been THC free now for over 5 months. He now has a new understanding and perspective about the effects of using marijuana and is taking his first steps towards advocacy, as this is his first time speaking out about this. So I really want to give him the time he needs and a big hand. So thank you, Toby, for being here. And the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. My name is Toby. I'm 22 years old. I reside in Chicago with my mom and my stepdad and my brother. And this is my story. Okay, so my first time getting intoxicated was in China in 2018 in the summer, and because it was easier to get our hands on alcohol there, due to the laws. and I remember my first time was like pure bliss, drinking. Um, and I couldn't wait to get for after that night when we had finished the bottle. I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait any longer for the next day that we would drink again on the trip. It was a trip to China and, with our school, and me and other boys were had were together in the same hotel room, and uh, well, we finally did get our hands on a $3 bottle, a $3 equivalent, a US dollar bottle of alcohol, and that night I was probably like a sip away from hospitalization and a shot away from death because I felt pain like I've never experienced, physical pain like I've never experienced. Like I got overly drunk, blacked out. I was it was horrible. Um, so when I first tried weed at a indoor trampoline park in the following December, and they don't have those same negative those same consequences, physical consequences. Um, I was really drawn to weed. Uh, it was not long before I became a fiend, um, as they say. Uh, I would ask whenever my friend had a cart, which is like oil, THC oil. I would ask for it, and they would give it to me, and we would always hang out in this guy's basement, and like for like every weekend we would do the same thing, and often during the week as we could. So it wasn't long before became a fiend, always asking for someone's stuff, and then I started buying my own stuff in 2020. Um, I would I would save the cash. I would use the cash that I made as a lifeguard at the Y to buy as much weed as I could. It was like that movie In Time where they store up time on their arm. Um, that's like their currency, but like for me, or their vitality. For me, it was weed. Like I needed weed to be happy, to be content, to have any comfortableness. Um, I was very uncomfortable when I didn't have weed. So I began smoking on my own in my room uh, that whole pandemic time. Um, and That's when I started in 2020. That's when I decided 2019 was like it was fun times, getting high every day, all day. But 2020 is when I started to become very delusional, or subtly delusional. I had theories about my classmates. I had theories about angels appearing to me. Um, I had theories about spirit, new age spirituality stuff. No, the lifeguard job did not test me for marijuana. Um, so I had many theories about the world, but everyone just saw it as, oh, he's just into that spirituality stuff. He's not really delusional. Or no one thought that. No one thought to think that at the time. And so finally, when I arrived at this college in 2020, and that same year, um, it was the perfect opportunity for me to get a job, to make money for weed, uh, spend all my money on weed, and get high in my room. I had purposely selected myself to stay with no roommates so that I could just smoke all I wanted and out the window, and avoiding the fire alarm so that I could get high in my room almost every day. I had a I had a I had a lot of days, almost every day I would get high in my room at night, at least at night, and during my classes, I would get high as often as I could. Like when I had weed, I had to smoke it. It had to be gone. Um, anyway, uh, one day, and then in 2021, my dad died. I was subtly delusional at the time. I had developed this theory about death, and it was getting me that crazy. I was certainly in psychosis at this point because my mom intervened, and I was quickly placed in a psych ward. Um, and uh, and I didn't listen to them. I didn't believe them when they told me that I had schizophrenia. I thought that I was actually like the smartest person ever. Like I thought that I had the answers. So, and that's just part of the delusion. Um, and it took me a couple times of being in the psych ward before. One night, uh, and also I was very skeptical about my medication. I thought that it was something like about the matrix that was, it's all part of the delusions that like the pill was what they gave you to be to keep you in the matrix. Um, and so one night I go to my friend's house. I get a cart from him or a disposable vape pen, and I'm smoking it in my room, listening to Tupac. And the lyrics he's saying, like I can just like wow, like he's talking about murder, he's talking about the police, and all of a sudden I get these theories that these people with bad intentions are just outside, and I'm on the third floor of the apartment, and so I realized I need to kill myself. Like I just developed this random theory that like I need to kill myself this night if I'm gonna make it to heaven. That's my theory. Um, that if I don't die that night, they're gonna catch me. They're gonna erase my memories. I won't remember anything in the morning, like about this. And so I'm terrified to lose my memories. I'm terrified to go to hell. Um, I I think that I try to like I can't open the window, so I can't throw myself outside the building. So I think, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll run myself over by the L tracks. Like I'll go get hit by a train. And so I walk all the way to the red line. Um, the trains aren't. I jump down on the tracks. The trains aren't coming that fast. So like I'm like, man, they must know. Like they're not coming fast enough to kill me. They're only coming fast enough to injure me. And so I throw I remember looking down at the ground and I throw myself over the overpass, and and then that's all I remember really. Like I woke up in the hospital a week later. I'm like, man, where am I? Oh yeah, I was listening to Tupac. I was smoking weed, and then it all clicks. Like they gave me the highest dose of the medication I'm currently on, and so then I snapped out of it, and I suddenly realized that I had been very crazy for like 2 years, or like a year or two, and uh, and so I decided that I knew that then that I had a problem with weed and that it was contributing to me being not able to be of sound mind and not being myself, and so it took me. I realized quickly realized like about maybe like on my birthday, the following 6 months later, I was 6 months clean or something, when I realized I could smoke and not go into psychosis due to my medication. Um, and so I did abuse my medication, and I did abuse marijuana further for like 2 more years. Yep. And
You want to share about what helped you to stop?
but what finally helped me to stop is I think the night that I stopped was the eclipse, and I'm like, okay, today is like a cool day, like I was very OCD about my sobriety dates because I'm in Marijuana Anonymous, and they're always like counting the days, um, and I thought that would be cool. And then my mom showed me this article about how like it contributes, my medication actually has a side effect that makes me impulsive and therefore contributes to that cycle is keeping on to smoke weed, like, and that even my the guilt that came along with smoking weed, like I know I shouldn't be smoking. I have so much guilt that I'm just gonna smoke that guilt away. It's a cycle. It's almost always a cycle. So yeah, that day I decided, man, I need to stop because this is an enemy that I'm fighting, and and it's like the devil, like it's the devil's lettuce. Like it appears to you as an angel of light, but in reality, it's it's destroying you. It's destroying your mind and causing you to fall into darkness. So yeah, that's my story, pretty much.
You're awesome, Toby. You're
Thank you.
absolutely amazing, dude. I love everything about what you said, dude.
Thank you, Kobe.
Mhm. Yes, thank you, Toby, for sharing and being brave enough to do so. And one of the things we like to do here at PAN with our Hill Day and our Advocacy Day is to bring you parents together. And last year's parents are still connecting with each other. And that's another important part of this webinar so that Kobe and Toby, isn't that funny, can connect with each other and be a support to each other. And of course, Winnie, we'd like to give you a chance to tell a little bit about how this affected you and how you helped, while Toby alluded to it, of course, how you helped him and some of the struggles you faced.
Thank you so much for inviting us. And I'm so proud of you, Toby.
Thank you.
And I know that we are so fortunate that we have Toby and Kobe with us, and we are so proud of both of them. So I know that any family on here who has experienced psychosis knows that it is hell on earth. So I won't dwell too much on that. I'll talk more about kind of like what helped. Some things that, were mentioned by Kobe and Linda: connection, support, a training that I went to on addiction. Something that really stuck with me is that the opposite of addiction is connection. And I believe that so powerfully. And I believe that that's what was the key to success for Tobias. I also learned that every family has to find their own way. I would go to meetings like this or support groups or webinars and, try to find like, what should I do? Like, what can I sign my kid up for? Like, I will pay any money. Like, tell me what I need to do. Like, should I kick them out? Should I do this? Should I do that? And I would have done anything, right? And I tried everything, it seemed like, but I also learned that every family really has to find their own way and has to find what works for them. But I think staying in dialogue, making sure your person knows that you love them, that you're there for them unconditionally, but also setting limits and making sure you're not enabling them. So there were a couple of times when I said, you know what, I love you too much and I am not going to enable you to continue using. If you don't do X, you need to pack your things and go right now. And that was something that was super scary, but I think that's what it was for me at the right time, at the right moment. That was what was the right thing to do. So he did have a therapist that was an addiction specialist. He went to an addiction program called Symmetria here in the city, MA, just everything. I tried to give every support that we could. So that's kind of what I've learned and what helped us. And I hope that something might be helpful to someone there in the meeting.
Thank you, Winnie. Again, it's all about the support. So now we're a little, a little past our regular time, but we're going to open it up for questions. And Bronwyn and I have been fielding those questions, and Bronwyn's going to start with some very important questions asked early on, and we will get through that as many as we can. And again, if we don't get to your question, you have to sign off, and you have a question, email us, and we will still get those answers for you because we're all connected. We can all be in touch with each other. We can pass on any information necessary. All right, Bronwyn, all